Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about all 7 books that I read in the month of August. I'm going to be completely honest with you. August was a very busy month for me and I feel like I didn't really have the best reading month. I moved in August, I started a new semester in August, and so it just was a very busy, hectic month for me. And so with that, I feel like I did rely quite a bit on my audiobooks, and those really did carry me through the month. I think I only finished 2 physical books in the whole entire month of August. The rest were audiobooks. I only really read about 1 romance book. I read 1 literary fiction, romance adjacent, and then I had 2 fantasy, 1 other literary fiction book that was the DNF, and then a general/women's fiction, and then 1 nonfiction. So genre-wise, I was a little bit all over the place. So without further ado, let's get into the very first book that I finished in August. So the first book that I ended up finishing was The Summer We Ran by Audrey Ingram. This was a book that was on my summer TBR and I finally got it through the library, so I read it as an ebook. The concept of the story is pretty interesting. It is a then and now timeline and it follows 2 people that are both running for the governor of Virginia, and they were both entangled for one summer when they were around 17 to 18, if I'm not mistaken. They are a part of 2 different political parties, and so they really aren't letting on that they knew each other at all within this process of running for governor. Personally, I didn't really enjoy this too much. I gave this 3 stars. I think it was a very interesting concept. I haven't seen any other book like this or with this concept, but I think that there were just a couple factors that really kept me from totally enjoying this book. I feel like that the amount of pull they still felt for the other person, even though it's been 20 plus years since they've even seen each other, was crazy for the amount of time and the actual connection that we sort of lacked to see, but that was apparently so great that they just couldn't deny this pull that they felt towards the other. I also really didn't feel any sort of chemistry or connection between the characters, not only in their teenage years, but in the present day years when they're grown adults. And I also feel like that this book really built up for this big reveal that was supposed to occur, but I really honestly personally did not like the reveal. I thought it would be something so much bigger, so much more just different, and then when it was revealed, I was really honestly let down by what the reveal was. I also feel like that in any sort of territory, when you are sometimes with these 2 different political parties so different, that it just felt like that their views were completely different, but then they just couldn't give up one of the other person. It just felt very weird to me. Like, it didn't really fully make sense that this connection that they were describing, when in reality, it was like, but really, where is the connection? Where is the chemistry? Because I wasn't feeling it as a reader. Not my favorite. I definitely am glad that I read this through the library, because I don't think that this would have been a book that I really would have wanted to come back to if I had bought it and had it on my shelves for myself personally. Overall, I really don't know if I would recommend this. I feel like potentially if this is something that you think seems interesting, maybe pick it up, but also just beware. It really felt like that the author was pushing it to be a romance, but I really just didn't think it should have been a romance. It didn't really make sense for me to have it that way. The next book is Air by Sabaa Tahir. I gave this book 5 stars and I absolutely love this book so much. This book is one that I did a hybrid of. I both listened to the audiobook and I read the physical book, and I personally, as someone that doesn't really do too much like hybrid of that, I absolutely loved that formatting for this book. I did read this book in a reading vlog, so if you want to see like my full real-time reactions and thoughts, I will link that video below. But this book takes place in the same world as her Ember in the Ashes series, which is one that I read this year and absolutely loved so much. This book takes place 20 years after that Ember in the Ashes, so you do see some familiar characters. I would highly recommend reading that series before going into this one. There are some new characters and some new kind of cultures that you see in this book that are totally different from ones that you saw in An Ember in the Ashes. So it really did feel almost at times like I was going into a whole new world, a whole new series, just because it was so different from what you had previously read about. I was a little bit intimidated going into this. I kept getting my hold on the library available, and for some reason I just kept ignoring it. I was so nervous going into this, but I'm so glad that I did end up picking this up. This book takes place, like I said, 20 years after An Ember in the Ashes, and you are basically following these 3 points of views, Quinn, Saoirse, and Aiz, and you're basically following them on this journey of this looming power that is kind of wreaking havoc upon the continent, and you are seeing them struggle with power, greed, with this sort of path that they were born into, and them feeling the sense of duty that they have. I thought that this was so beautifully done. I absolutely loved this book. I loved the storytelling, the characterization, the writing, the themes. All of it was so well done in my opinion. I loved the audiobook. I think that the narrators did such an amazing job with this book, and you are wanting to read this book, I highly recommend the audiobook. I think that the audiobook really did help so much with immersing me into the story, especially because it really hasn't been long since I read An Ember in the Ashes and that whole series, but I did almost feel a little bit confused just because it's such a different world culturally, new characters and new countries and everything. So I think the audiobook helped so much with that, getting acclimated and feeling more comfortable and familiar with what was going on again. I think that it was so interesting getting to see these characters who were so different, had such different backgrounds, but yet they were dealing with fairly similar things. There was one thing about the ending that I did predict, and then another thing that caught me so off guard. I was shocked. I need the next book immediately, but there's not even a release date for it. This is a duology. So I just feel unwell because I want to know what happens, and the reasoning for what was revealed in that last scene so bad. I want to know like right now, but it's okay. I'll wait patiently for the next book. But with this book, I feel like it really just solidified Saba as one of my new favorite authors. I think that she is an artist. I love her, and I love her writing. I love her stories. The next book was an audiobook, and it was the DNF. This was Sandwich by Catherine Newman. I picked this book up with my mom on a whim at Target, and we started reading it. I was listening to the audiobook. Personally, I felt it to be a little bit all over the place, and then some of it just felt very vulgar at times. Like there was a lot of cursing. I DNF'd it at around 25%. I just really didn't care for it too much. My mom didn't really like it, so we were just like, let's just not even finish it. But it basically follows this family as they are going on a summer vacation, and you're following the main character who is, I think, around 50, and she is starting to go through menopause, so it kind of was starting to follow that journey. My mom and I thought that that would be an interesting thing to read about, but we ended up just not really liking it that much, so ended up DNFing that. After that, I started the audiobook of Jade City by Fonda Lee. This was another book that was incredibly intimidating to me. This sat on my shelf for over a year, and I finally decided to pick up the audiobook and start that. And I'm really glad I did. I ended up actually really enjoying it. I gave it a 3.75 stars. In this story, you are following this family, think almost like a gang, and they are basically given more enhanced abilities through Jade. It's almost like a form of magic for them in a way. They are the ruler clan of this area and of this territory, and it's basically following these opposing gangs that are almost kind of infringing on their territory, that kind of drama. But it's these 3 siblings, basically 4 also, but 3 siblings, and the roles that they were born into and how they have to step up into these roles and take over the family business. Really enjoying the audiobook. The story itself felt very lush and complex, and it also almost felt like you were watching it in your mind as you were listening to the audiobook. It felt like a show that was on. I do think that this did take a little bit of time just for me to get used to who was who. There's a lot of names, there's a lot of different ways that they almost refer to people. So at first I was like, okay, is this a different person? But then I'm like, no, it's the same person. They're just using a different name to refer to them as. So for that, it just took me a little bit to get used to. I did really like the family dynamics of this book. You see how these 3 siblings were almost born for these roles, but yet so many things get mixed up along the way, and how they have to adapt and overcome these obstacles that are now occurring. Personally, I wish we got to see a little bit more of Jade in use and the full extent to what it could have been used as, but there are 3 books, and this is a epic fantasy series pretty much, so I'm sure that in later books you get to see more of that. I think that at times it felt like there was a lot going going on in this book, but at the same time, it did feel a little bit slow pacing wise, or maybe in terms of like the action. Not saying that that's a bad thing. It was just something that was interesting that I noted along the story. I do think that if you would read the physical book, I can imagine it might feel a little bit slow. So I think the audiobook helped kind of deter that feeling of slowness that might occur if you read the physical book. But I honestly would consider continuing the series. I do think if I do, it will definitely be audiobooks. I don't necessarily think that this will be a book that I will physically read, and I'm used to how everything's pronounced like as the audiobook. If I was reading it, I might have to get like a little bit used to like what was what again. After that, I started the audiobook of Is She Really Going Out With Him by Sophie Cousins. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce her last name, but I saw a friend on Bookstagram really enjoyed this book and really rave about it, so I decided to give it a try. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4.25 stars. Our main character, Anna, is a journalist, and when her position is potentially threatened at work, she suggests that she do a dating column, and the whole premise of that column is her 2 children picking out who she is going to date. It ends up being a little competition with this other man named Will that is her kind of workplace rival. I think that this was a perfect rom-com, honestly. This had everything that you wanted in a rom-com. It was romantic, it was funny, it was also serious at the same times in certain points, and I think it handled everything really well. She's a single mom, but she has like a little bit of a complicated relationship with her children's father. I read it pretty quickly. It was very easy. Honestly, I really enjoyed it. So much so I actually ended up getting the physical copy of it. This was my first ever book by this author, and I would be really interested to read other books by her. I had very little expectations going into this book, and so I think that also helped me just really enjoy it. I think that the pacing was great, the characters were likable. I think you could always tell that they had their best intentions set forth with everything they did. I think that Anna, her kids, and you see Anna's sister as well, and they were all so sweet. The dates picked out by her children was a very fun concept. And then you also got the addition of the little workplace rivalry romance going on there. So that was a really fun addition as well. I loved getting to see the romance progress, but I also really enjoyed getting to see the little friendships that Anna made along the way as well. So overall, I highly recommend if you're looking for a fun rom-com. Next up was Homefront by Kirsten Hanna, and I rated this 3 stars. I listened to the audiobook of this. This was another buddy read with my mom. I don't think that I'm going to read more Kirsten Hanna books. This is my 5th book by her, and I feel like all of her books are the same yet different. And by that I mean it's a different time period every time, but no matter what, it's going to be depressing. And it's going to be depressing with how much payoff, because is it really worth it for how sometimes depressing it is? In my opinion, that's my opinion. And I understand that so many people love her books, but let me tell you what this is about first. This book follows Jo and Michael. Jo was in the army, and then I believe she was in the National Guard. I don't think it was the Coast Guard. I think it was the National Guard after that. But her husband is a criminal defense lawyer. They have 2 children together, 2 daughters. And Michael really resents the fact that Jo is in the military. And eventually, this takes place in around 2005, if I'm not mistaken. Jo ends up getting deployed, and you basically follow the whole progression of her being over in Iraq, Michael having to deal with taking care of both the daughters because apparently he's like incompetent for some reason. I feel like in the beginning, it was a very interesting kind of setup. You see Jo, who is this very positive, no matter what, I'll get it done type of person. And you see how being in Iraq and being in this active war zone is really changing her as a person. And then you also get to see how their children are dealing with it and how Michael himself is dealing with it. I feel like around the 40% mark, I could kind of see where this book was going to go. I feel like all her books are just a little bit different with how like, okay, what you have to think like what can go wrong, and then like something like that typically happens. So I just also feel like one of their daughters was preteen, like 12 to 13, and she was an absolute brat. She was the rudest character I've ever read. They didn't like not discipline her, but like correct her behavior in any way. They just kind of like enabled it. And then they had another daughter who was, I don't even know how old she was, but she acted like an infant, and she was not an infant. So the aging just felt a little off there too. That's a different issue. I think that this will probably be my last book by Kirsten Hanna. All of her books are just way too sad for me, with very little payoff. Like The Great Alone, that was like depressing after depressing after depressing. And it was like, what was the good thing that happened in that book? Nothing. I just think that maybe she's just not the author for me. And that's okay. Totally okay. Then the last book that I read in August was another audiobook, and this was Disney Adults Exploring a Magical Subculture by AJ Wolf. I honestly had no idea what this book was about. I put it on hold to the library because I thought it seemed pretty interesting by the title. I didn't even read the description and ended up listening to the audiobook. It was super quick. It was like 5 hours. I don't really know how I feel about it because I, going into it, didn't know who AJ Wolf was. She is the author or creator of Disney Food Blog, which is a really huge social media account, and originally it was a blog. But with that, I didn't really know going into it that this was going to be written by someone who is such an avid Disney enthusiast. Well, yes, that makes sense because it is a book about Disney. I just thought it would be a little bit more of like an outsider point of view onto Disney adults and that whole kind of culture. I still think that the research that was done was very well done in this book. There were a lot of anecdotes and a lot of people's stories about why they like Disney. I think that it would have been, I don't know, more interesting to, I really don't know what I would like change about this book. I didn't really give it a rating. I think that I was just expecting a little bit more rather than just these tons of anecdotes about why people love Disney and how it made them feel. The author narrated the audiobook. I didn't really enjoy her narration style. It felt very, very overly enthusiastic. So that was my only critique for that portion of like it being an audiobook. But I do think that it was interesting, I guess. I don't really know how to feel about it. Those were all 7 books that I read in the month of August. I had an okay month. I feel like nothing totally stood out besides Is She Really Going Out With Him and Air. Everything else was just kind of like meh. So not terrible, but not great. So if you guys have read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts. And I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!